Ole Miss is facing its biggest basketball game today in the Chris Beard era, potentially. We need to talk to Michael Katz and get the lowdown on this game.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm Steven Willis of the Locked On Ole Miss Podcast. Thank you very much for making Locked On your first listen every day, and thank you very much for tuning in. We are going to be joined by Michael Katz from the Northeast Mississippi Tupelo Daily Journal to have a pregame show about this Ole Miss game. And just so everybody knows, there is not going to be a reaction show after this basketball game. I'm going to be out of town. I'm otherwise engaged. So do not tune into the Locked On Ole Miss channel expecting a postgame show. Although if Ole Miss loses this game, Michael, I would probably have the flamethrower out that day. So it might be better than I'm not on the air.
Yeah, this, a couple weeks ago, I didn't really think much of this game in terms of context and what it could mean. But given the last couple weeks, this, again, I'm not a huge must wins guy, but I do believe in vibes and good feelings at certain times of year. And this is not the time of year you want to be feeling bad. 4-game losing streak would be really tough, especially when you have Tennessee and Florida to end the season. They got off to such a good start in SEC play. If they were like 8-3, 8-4, whatever it was, if they end up with 8 wins, I understand that 8-10 in the SEC is pretty good, but given where they started, it's going to probably be a little disappointing.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that before the season, and I don't know if you can blame the kids and all of that, because everybody was talking, Ole Miss needs to make the NCAA tournament. Ole Miss needs to do the NCAA tournament. It's about the NCAA tournament. Well, Ole Miss hit that 8th win to where everybody told them that they had made the NCAA tournament, and there was an immediate letdown. That's kind of human nature, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, again, with the SEC being as good as it is, that number was thrown out pretty early, and they hit it. Again, they got off to such a good start. But, man, just the SEC just grinds on you. I mean, there's no date. There's no games off. It doesn't matter who you're playing. It's gonna be rough. Again, Oklahoma was in a pretty bad spot, and they just took care of business against Mississippi State. And I believe they played Kentucky? No. Kentucky
they got beat by Kentucky on a buzzer beater.
Yeah. So they're playing good ball right now. I mean, it's just Vanderbilt's playing well, Missouri's playing well. It just seems like everybody's playing really well and has pretty good vibes. And Ole Miss is just, I don't know. This isn't the time of year where you want to be searching for who you are, identity wise. You like to get that figured out in non-conference. I think this team's having a little bit of an identity crisis.
Yeah, and a lot of that I think has to do with Morell getting more and more injured as the course of the season, because this team is at its best when Matt Morell is going off. Whenever he is the man on the floor that has to be paid attention to by the other team, it makes Padula better. It makes Juju Murray better. It makes Dre Davis better, honestly. It takes all the pressure off these other players. Whenever he is down like he was against Vanderbilt, that can be problematic. And it would be interesting because if Ole Miss can get the win today against Oklahoma, it's honestly no harm, no foul. You're guaranteed 9-9 in the SEC. You have the ultimate free shot at home against Tennessee in a game where if they're not hitting jumpers, you have a chance to win that game. They do not score if they're not raining down threes. Now, sometimes they can just freaking shoot 75% on them, but it is what it is. And then you have that game at Florida that's on senior night that nobody's counting on that as a win. This is what makes this Saturday so important, because if Ole Miss loses to Oklahoma, ends up on a 7-game losing streak, first game in the SEC tournament, you're having to play on Wednesday night or something like that, the whole tenor of the season changes. But if Ole Miss just wins one game, wins against Oklahoma, all of a sudden you're a 5, you're a 6, you're a 7 seed, and you're going into the NCAA tournament with actually something to play for, wearing a home jersey. It's really, honestly, that simple, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that, if they lose this game, you don't want to have to count on breaking losing streak against Tennessee or Florida. That's that's a lot of pressure on you. Those are two of the best teams in the country, and I know the Tennessee isn't always making shots, but when they do, they're hard to beat, and they play defense in a way that is just they make your life really, really hard. And Florida's Florida. That's going to be brutal on the road. I mean, if this losing streak keeps going, and you're just looking for that win to get it, stop the bleeding, you do not want it to be against those two teams. If it doesn't happen against Oklahoma, it's going to be a tall task.
Yeah, it's going to be huge. And there's a chance with the way the bracket's set up right now, if Ole Miss ended up in that same spot, which they wouldn't, but you're in a bracket either facing LSU or Vanderbilt. And those are two teams that Ole Miss doesn't necessarily match up that well against.
Yeah, I mean, again, LSU came down literally to the buzzer, and Vanderbilt was, I mean, they beat them up. I think the thing that's got to be a little concerning with Ole Miss right now is they're just digging themselves into these big holes, and it's early, and I get it against Auburn. Auburn's Auburn, and that 22-point lead, I think it got down to 6, and it looked like they were kind of making some strides, and then obviously the second half things went off the rails a little bit. But against Vanderbilt, I think it was a 19-point game. Against State at State, they were down big. It's just, I think when you have to exert that much energy to get yourself out of a hole, it's really hard to finish off a game.
Yeah. That Vanderbilt game, Ole Miss came all the way back from a 19-point deficit, and it looked like they were going to be able to take control, but they were out of gas. You could actually see it on the court that they were out of gas. And at that point, Vandy made a couple of shots and was able to put the game kind of away because of how much energy that Ole Miss expanded to give up to come back from a 19-point deficit. These slow starts Chris Beard has to figure out a way to match the intensity, because one of the problems that I think is what's going on is Ole Miss has not only gone up against some pretty good teams, they've gone up against some desperate teams that were jumped on you a little bit because they had to. Their urgency. Vanderbilt, when Ole Miss played them, they weren't going to necessarily to the NCAA tournament. They needed to play their way in. Mississippi State was coming off a 3-game losing streak. We had the conversation of what was going on. They were struggling. It was a desperate team. And then Auburn, everybody's going to say, what were they desperate about? Well, Auburn's last 3 games was like A&M, Kentucky, and Tennessee, which means that Ole Miss win at home had to happen. Because if you're going to get one other for an SEC regular season title, you'd like to think that you could count on this Ole Miss game as well. Ole Miss has to learn how to match the intensity of the teams they're playing, and I think that's the step today, for the Ole Miss Rebels.
Yeah, I think the idea of the desperate team is a double-edged sword. Sometimes it works really, really well, again, like we've seen, and sometimes it can go completely haywire. I'm going to be interested to see what the desperate version of Ole Miss looks like. Is it trying too hard to make things happen, or is it playing with intensity and enthusiasm and playing the way that we saw them play for so much of this year? It's going to be really interesting. I'm fascinated to see how this one goes.
Listen, Ole Miss got beat by 30 points by Auburn, but if you just actually watch the game, there's some things you can take from that game and build on, especially on the offensive side of the floor. They had 30 free throws in that game. And the best version of Ole Miss is a version of Ole Miss that goes to the line quite a bit. So that's good. Ole Miss just has to figure out how to bring back their defensive pressure that they were doing in January and February that seemingly has gone away over the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that they got to figure out is when another team starts to go on runs, how do you stop those runs? How do you create stops? Because it just seems like when things spiral, they really kind of spiral, and they just don't have a ton of guys. Obviously they have guys who make shots here and there, but I think it's hard. I get it, it's Auburn. It's hard to string consecutive stops together against the best team in the country. But we've seen that when things start to spiral, they really spiral, and I'm curious to see how does that stop?
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first and listen every day. When we come back, we will continue to figure out how Ole Miss can get some good vibes, what they need to do against Oklahoma when we talk with Michael Katz in just a second. But first, I do want to let you know about Gerber Life Fabric by Gerber Life. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. That is why securing their spot is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it easy to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes. In many cases, no health exam is required. You can get $1 million of coverage in less than $1 a day, so protecting your loved ones doesn't have to break the bank either. Fabric also offers digital wills and access to investment accounts to help plan for your children's future. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/LockedOnCollege. That's meetfabric.com/LockedOnCollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states, and prices are subject to underwriting and health questions. So this game against the Oklahoma Sooners that's coming up, we talked about Ole Miss needing good vibes. How is Ole Miss going to get good vibes in this game? How is Ole Miss going to accomplish what they can do? We've seen, even in the blowout losses to Auburn and Vanderbilt, and even at parts in the Mississippi State game, you saw a version of the Ole Miss team that can be very, very good if they can string that along for a long period of time. How does Ole Miss do that against the Oklahoma Sooners?
I think that this can't be one of those games where they find themselves in an early double-digit hole. Like, I think that when that happens, it's here we go again, and then you're using up all that energy to try to get out of it. I think, and again, it's cliche. Every team, of course, wants to get off to a quick start, but I think coming out hot. Listen, Ole Miss, when they're not hitting threes, things can be tough. I think they were 0 for 9 to start against Vanderbilt. Again, that's part of how that hole happens. I think that what it's defensive intensity too. It's making sure you're getting stops early too. They just, whatever it is they have to do, they can't dig themselves into a big hole, because then again, like, it's how the last few games gone. As natural and as a human being, you're naturally going to say, "Oh God, here we go again." And I just think that, like, they just need to feel a different way right now. And listen, I know it's going to be it's not senior day's the next one against Tennessee, but listen, I understand this is a trying time of season, and it's the stretch run. But I think, like we talked about earlier, the intensity, the desperation, if they're not showing that early, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, it gets scary really, really quick if the same thing that happens against Oklahoma that happened against Vanderbilt and Auburn. And once you fell behind like that against Auburn, you kind of knew exactly how that game was going to end up going, because there's been a lot of good teams that walk into that arena that walk out just like that. So, but you can take some good things from it. Offensively, I think Ole Miss played fairly well. Defensively, they've got to figure that out. Mark Adams and those guys, they have to handle what's going on the defensive side of the ball. So we'll see. I think that the catalyst, though, for Ole Miss this season, not just in the game against Oklahoma, in the season, this is statistically, I think, proven out. In games that Dre Davis kind of goes off and isn't a really effective player, Ole Miss wins. When games that he fouls out and he struggles and he scores 4 points, 6 points, Ole Miss struggles to win the game. So I think the easy thing in this game would be Dre Davis kind of going off.
Yeah, and again, I think it's defensively too. I think his length, when he's fully engaged, he's able to be on the floor. I think he makes an impact there. Again, I know plus minus isn't everything, but when he's got a good plus, I think good things are happening for Ole Miss. So, yeah, and again, especially with Matt Morell not being 100%, or it sounds like probably not even close to 100%. You need other guys to step up, and Dre Davis, when he has stepped up, good things have happened. And when he disappears, we've seen these games really get away from them.
Yeah, and I think it's important for Ole Miss to avoid these scoring drought. And at least when they have one, don't have a 5-minute one. Have a 2-minute one. I think that should be the goal. Just let's cut the scoring droughts in about half.
Yeah, it's I always have stat broadcast on, which gives you like runs and scoring droughts, and there's been an alarming amount of ones that are 4 minutes plus recently. Those are not trends that I think Ole Miss can afford to be a part of right now.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first and listen every day. When we come back, we're going to turn our attention to baseball, the other spring sport that's going on, and Ole Miss is hot right now. We'll talk to Michael about that in just a second. But I do want to let you know right now about Prize Picks. March basketball is here, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, your best source for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. It's fast, it's easy, and it keeps every game exciting. I love how I can make picks in less than 60 seconds and stay engaged all game long. When I win, the money hits the account in less than 15 minutes, so no waiting around. Prize Picks even offers weekly promos like Taco Tuesday, where you can get discounted player projections for even more value. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, to get $50 off instantly, or $50 instantly after you play that first $5 lineup. That's a horrible business model, but it seems to be working for Prize Picks to give away $50 for just playing $5. I mean, that seems like a no-brainer there. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play that first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, let's go back to Michael of the Northeast Mississippi Tupelo Daily Journal. Michael, talking about the baseball team, Hunter Elliott has come back. It's amazing what happens. We talked about off air before we got on there. It's amazing when you have an ace, how the baseball team looks differently.
When you have a guy that you know is going to go out there and eat competitive innings every Friday, everything else becomes a lot easier, because then you know what? If Saturday and Sunday you need some bullpen help, you've got your whole bullpen for the most part. You've got fresh arms, and I just think that, like, going into a series knowing that you've got a guy who's going to give you a chance, I think that goes a long way in terms of confidence. And I understand that, in terms of the series they've played, and obviously that win against Arizona and then the tournament was huge, a 2-1 game. If he does not pitch as well as he does, they don't win that game because it was a 2-1 game. Listen, do we learn a ton against Eastern Kentucky? No, but he did what he needed to do. He looked like he was supposed to. I imagine we're going to see the same thing against Wright State this weekend. I think what's so positive is he looks like the guy we all remember in terms of just being able to dominate batters, to have swing and miss stuff, and to eat innings. And I think that when you can go and listen in the SEC, when you get to SEC play and you're going Fridays, you are facing some of the best pitching in the country. When you have a guy that is one of the best pitchers in the country too, I think it changes everything.
Yeah, and it makes things a little bit easier. Even the Arizona game, we'll talk about that. That was the first game back. That was a 2-1 game. Fine. That's a pretty good way of looking at how an SEC Friday night is going to look. You're going to have those low scoring games. You cannot have a pitcher that will allow a 5 spot in an inning. Look what happened against Texas the next night in Arlington. You have one bad inning. That's the ball game. Somebody like Hunter Elliott gives you a chance to start every weekend in SEC play 1-0, legitimately. And like you said, if you're 1-0, all you need is one win out of the next 2 games to take a series. And if that happens, you're hosting a regional.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't, since he went down in early 2023. I know he made one more start later that year, but really since February of 2023, like, they haven't had a guy that they could depend on every Friday, and it truly changes everything. Like, my first baseball season here was 2022, and when they had Dylan DeLucia and Hunter, you felt really good about your odds in the series, especially towards the end of the year.
With DeLucia throwing frisbees up at the plate.
But man, I mean, there was no one more reliable in college baseball down the stretch than those two. And so I think when you have pitchers like that are every game going to give you a chance, it really changes and takes pressure off the hitters too. Because again, you're not going to hit everything, especially when you get into SEC play. But if your pitcher's a little bit better than their pitcher, then you're going to be in a good spot.
Speaking of hitting everything, how about old Hayden Federico? It seems like everything that comes off his bat is coming off hard. right now. And every at bat is a quality at bat. And the only thing is did he hit it right at somebody? I mean, that has happened a few times. But as a true freshman, this guy's been a little bit of a revelation for Ole Miss.
Yeah, and we chatted with him for the first time. I think it was after one of the Eastern Kentucky games. And his dad's a college baseball coach. He's just very composed. And when we talked to him, I was like, this does not seem like an 18 or 19-year-old. Like, this seems like a seasoned veteran. And then when you see him play that same way. He's not overwhelmed. Even at bats when he's not getting on base, they're good at bats. He's not looking overmatched. And again with him and Pano, and you got to feel pretty good about the homegrown guys on this team right now.
Seeing a lefty shortstop put one over the right center field fence the other night, that there was a little bit of deja vu there.
It's crazy because, again, we hadn't talked to him either, and we talked to him after that game, and he is huge. Pano is a huge kid. I mean, this is like a 6'3", again, built awfully similar to another shortstop Ole Miss had very recently. It's just just some guys just look different out there, and I know he hasn't gotten off to the start that he wanted, but again, it's going to happen. But I think the future is really bright for those two guys.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Michael Katz from the Northeast Mississippi Tupelo Daily Journal. Michael, what do you got going on this weekend, buddy?
Man, we got everything going on right now. It's crossover season, as you know, with baseball and basketball and a lot going on. Should be we're getting to that time of the year where these we're kind of all looking at seeding in the SEC tournament. So every game, I know every game means something, but these games truly are meaning more. So gonna be following all that stuff closely. Obviously we got the combine going on right now. I'm a combine sicko, so once that kind of gets a little bit more underway, probably have some stuff on that. Obviously, a lot of buzz around the 11 Ole Miss guys. I think there's a few Ole Miss players who are going to make themselves some money this weekend.
Yeah, I think so as well. Anyway, Michael Katz, thank you very much for coming on the show. We'll talk to you next week, buddy.
Appreciate you, man.